The silence in the tribunal chamber stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Commander Zexai's clawed fingers drummed against the metal table, each tap echoing through the vast space like a countdown to revelation. Around him, representatives from the major galactic powers leaned forward in their seats, their various forms of breathing apparatus creating a symphony of mechanical whispers. "Begin your testimony, Commander," spoke Archon Veltar, the crystalline being who served as tribunal judge. Her voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrix, converting the harmonic frequencies of her species into something approximating universal speech. Zexai's throat sacs inflated slightly, a sign of deep contemplation among his people. "Where does one begin when describing the impossible?" he asked, his reptilian gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. "Perhaps with First Contact Protocol 779. The day we discovered that Earth's dominant species had somehow achieved interstellar communication without ever leaving their home solar system." The Voldorian representative, Ambassador Kreeth, shifted uncomfortably in his environmental suit. "Impossible. No species achieves quantum entanglement communication before developing faster-than-light travel. It violates the natural progression of technological development." A sound escaped Zexai's throat that might have been laughter, if laughter could carry the weight of trauma. "That was our first mistake, Ambassador, applying logic to humanity. We spent 3 solar cycles monitoring their transmissions, trying to understand how a species trapped on a single world had managed to crack the quantum barrier. Our greatest scientists theorized that perhaps they had found ancient technology, or that they were being aided by another civilization. And the truth?" pressed Dr. Bo Yilmagna, the insectoid representative whose compound eyes reflected the chamber's dim lighting like fractured mirrors. "The truth was far worse," Zexai replied. "They had done it themselves, not through superior technology or alien intervention, but through something we didn't understand at the time. Something that would later define every interaction we had with their species." He paused, his serpentine tail coiling around the base of his chair. "Desperation." The commander activated a holographic display that materialized above the table. The image showed Earth as it appeared from deep space, a blue marble suspended in the cosmic void. This was humanity's cage. One world, orbiting a yellow star in what we considered an unremarkable spiral arm of their galaxy. They had just achieved nuclear capability and were beginning to reach toward their natural satellite with primitive chemical rockets. "By galactic standards," interrupted Archon Veltar, "they were barely out of their technological infancy." Indeed. Yet somehow, they had managed to detect our long-range survey probe that had been observing their system for standard rotations. Not only detect it, but communicate with it. The hologram shifted, showing complex mathematical equations floating in the space above the table. These were the first transmissions they sent. Prime number sequences, mathematical proofs, basic physics equations. Standard first contact protocols that they should not have known existed. Ambassador Kreeth's tentacles writhed with confusion. How is this possible? First contact protocols are established by the Galactic Council. No isolated species should know them. Because, Zexai said slowly, they had been listening. For decades, they had been intercepting our communications across their local space, learning our languages, studying our protocols, not through any advanced technology, but through sheer bloody-minded persistence. The hologram changed again, showing massive arrays of primitive radio telescopes pointing toward the stars. They built these listening posts using materials they refined from their own planet's crust, powered by energy they generated by splitting atoms. Generation after generation of their species devoted themselves to this single purpose, learning what was out there. The chamber fell quiet except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Yelmagna's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep thought among her kind. You speak of desperation, Commander. What drove them to such extremes? Zexai's scales rippled, a physiological response his species exhibited when recalling unpleasant memories. We learned this only later, after formal contact was established. Humanity's home star was dying. Not immediately, not within their current generation or even several generations to come. But their scientists had calculated that within roughly 5,000 of their years, their sun would expand and consume their world. 5,000 years is an eternity, protested the Valdorian representative. Most species achieve interstellar travel within 50 years of nuclear capability. Why such urgency? Because humanity thinks differently than we do, Zexai explained. They plan not just for themselves, but for descendants they will never meet. They feel responsibility not just for their current generation, but for generations that exist only as possibilities. He gestured to the hologram, which now displayed a timeline stretching far into the future. They knew that waiting for natural technological progression might mean extinction for their species, so they chose to accelerate their development through what they called crisis innovation. The term hung in the air like a weapon waiting to be deployed. Archon Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with a deeper blue light, indicating intense concentration. Define this concept. Crisis innovation is the practice of pushing scientific and technological boundaries through artificially created pressure situations, Zexai said. Humanity deliberately put themselves into survival scenarios to force rapid advancement. They divided their species into competing factions, each racing to achieve specific technological goals before their rivals. They created artificial scarcity of resources to drive innovation and efficiency. He paused, struggling with the concept. They even deliberately created controlled conflicts to accelerate military technology development. The silence that followed was profound. In galactic civilization, such practices were considered not just wasteful but actively barbaric. The idea of deliberately inducing suffering to achieve technological advancement violated fundamental principles that united all spacefaring species. "Surely you exaggerate," whispered Dr. Yilmagna. "I wish I did," Zexay replied. "But their historical records are extensive and thoroughly documented. They called it the Cold War, a decades-long period of controlled hostility between major factions of their species. During this period, they developed nuclear weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization, space travel technology, computer systems, and eventually the quantum communication arrays that first detected our probe." Ambassador Kreeth's environmental suit hissed as he adjusted its settings. "This is madness." No rational species deliberately brings itself to the brink of extinction for technological advancement. "Rational?" Zexay repeated, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration mixed with horror. "That word has no meaning when applied to humanity. They are not rational. They are something else entirely, something that we didn't have words for until we met them." The hologram shifted again, displaying the moment of first contact. A sleek Thrakari exploration vessel hanging in space near Earth's moon, while primitive human spacecraft approached in formations that seemed almost ritualistic in their precision. "This is where my personal involvement began," Zexai continued. "I was first officer aboard the exploration vessel Scales of Truth, part of the survey fleet sent to establish formal contact with this remarkable species. Our mission was straightforward. Evaluate their technological level, determine their readiness for galactic citizenship, and begin the standard integration process. A routine first contact mission, observed Archon Veltar. There is nothing routine about humanity, Zexhay said firmly. The first indication of this came when they insisted on conducting the initial meeting in space rather than on their planet's surface. Their reasoning was logical enough. They wanted to minimize the risk of contamination or accidents that might affect their home world, but their method of achieving this revealed something disturbing. The hologram zoomed in on one of the approaching human vessels. To galactic eyes, it was a crude construction of metal and ceramics, held together with what appeared to be explosive bolts and powered by controlled chemical explosions.
Their spacecraft were disposable, Zexhay explained.
Single-use vehicles designed to complete one mission and then be discarded. But inside these primitive vessels were humans who had volunteered for a journey they knew might kill them. His scales darkened to a deep purple. The psychological profiles of these volunteers were disturbing. They were not their species' best and brightest sent on a prestigious mission. They were individuals who had specifically requested assignment to what their leaders termed high-risk exploration duties. Dr. Yilmagna's compound eyes focused intently on the hologram. They sent their expendable members? No, Zexhay said quietly. They sent their volunteers. The difference is crucial to understanding humanity. These individuals had not been selected for the mission. They had competed for it. Thousands of their species had applied for the chance to be the first to meet an alien civilization, knowing that they might die in the attempt. The implications of this hung heavy in the chamber's recycled atmosphere. In galactic civilization, first contact missions were staffed by the most valuable members of society, scientists, diplomats, cultural experts whose loss would represent a significant blow to their civilization. The idea of volunteers competing for potentially fatal missions was almost incomprehensible. "What happened during the actual contact?" asked Ambassador Kreeth. "Something that changed my understanding of what it means to be alive," Zexay replied. The hologram shifted to show the interior of a space station, a joint construction that served as neutral ground for the first formal meeting between species. The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals: a scientist, a linguist, a military officer, a cultural representative, and what they called a philosopher. Each had been selected not just for their expertise, but for their ability to think under pressure. Zex's tail tightened around his chair. The Thrakari delegation, including myself, numbered 15. We brought atmospheric analysts, cultural experts, xenobiologists, diplomatic specialists, security personnel, and support staff. We had prepared for every contingency our collective experience could imagine. Standard protocol, noted Archon Viltar approvingly. Standard protocol proved useless, Zexai said. The humans had also prepared, but in a way that caught us completely off guard. Rather than bringing specialists to handle specific aspects of the negotiation, they had trained each member of their delegation in multiple disciplines. Their scientist could negotiate. Their linguist understood military tactics. Their philosopher had extensive knowledge of galactic law. The hologram displayed the meeting room, showing beings from 2 worlds sitting across from each other at a table that had been specially designed to accommodate both species' physiological needs. The first session lasted 18 hours. Zexai continued. By galactic standards, this was an unconscionably long time for an initial contact meeting. Most first encounters are brief affairs, exchange of basic information, establishment of communication protocols, agreement on future meetings. The humans had other ideas. They asked questions. Not just about our technology or our civilization, but about everything. How our government functioned, what resources were available in galactic trade networks, what conflicts existed between species, what laws governed interstellar relations. They wanted to understand not just who we were, but how the entire galaxy worked. Ambassador Kreeth's tentacles writhed uncomfortably. Such comprehensive questioning during first contact is considered aggressive behavior. We thought so too, Zexai agreed. Our delegation leader, Captain Morsha, eventually expressed concern about the intensity of their inquiries. The human response was illuminating. The hologram zoomed in on one of the human faces, a weathered female with graying hair and eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. Dr. Sarah Chen, their delegation leader, explained that humanity approached first contact not as a social courtesy, but as their species' most important negotiation. They had one chance to make an impression that would determine their civilization's future. They could not afford to waste time on pleasantries when they needed to understand their place in a galaxy that had existed without them for millions of years. Logical, if coldly calculated, observed Dr. Rixpector. Yil Magna. That was only the beginning, Zexai said. During the second session, they presented us with something that no first contact species had ever offered before, a complete strategic analysis of their own world. The hologram shifted to display a 3-dimensional model of Earth, overlaid with data streams and analytical projections. They had mapped every resource on their planet, calculated the theoretical maximum population their world could support, projected the environmental impact of various development scenarios, and created detailed models of their species' expansion into their local solar system. They offered all of this information freely, without any request for reciprocal data. Archon Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with confusion. Standard first contact protocols specifically prohibits sharing detailed planetary information until at least the 5th formal meeting. Why would they reveal such strategic intelligence? Because, Zexai said slowly, they wanted us to understand that they were not asking for charity. They were proposing a business arrangement. The chamber's ambient lighting seemed to dim as the implications of this statement settled over the assembled delegates. In galactic civilization, new species were gradually integrated through a careful process designed to prevent cultural shock and technological dependency. The idea of a first contact species attempting to negotiate as equals was unprecedented. Dr. Wei Chen's exact words were burned into my memory, Zexai continued. She said, "We are not children seeking guidance from wise elders. We are a young civilization with specific resources and capabilities, seeking mutually beneficial relationships with established galactic powers. We understand that we have much to learn, but we also understand that we have value to offer." "Impossible," breathed Ambassador Kreeth. "No pre-contact species has anything to offer galactic civilization." "That assumption," Zexai said grimly, "would prove to be the most dangerous mistake any of us had ever made." The human demonstration began 3 days after the formal first contact protocols concluded. Commander Zexai still remembered the precise moment when everything changed, when the galaxy's understanding of warfare, survival, and the nature of sentient species was forever altered. They called it a capabilities presentation. Zexai told the tribunal, his clawed hands tracing abstract patterns on the table's surface. Standard diplomatic procedure suggested that new species typically demonstrated their technological achievements through scientific displays, artistic presentations, or cultural exchanges. Humanity chose a different approach. The holographic display materialized above the table, showing a barren asteroid field in the outer reaches of the Sol system. Dozens of rocky bodies tumbled through space in lazy orbits, their surfaces scarred by eons of cosmic bombardment. They invited our survey fleet to witness what they termed a practical demonstration of human problem-solving methodologies, Zexai continued. Captain Morsha agreed, expecting to observe some form of mining operation or perhaps a construction project. The humans had been remarkably vague about the specifics. Dr. Yilmagna's compound eyes reflected the holographic light as she studied the display. What was the nature of this demonstration? Warfare, Zexai said simply. The single word hung in the chamber's filtered atmosphere like a toxic cloud. Not theoretical warfare, not historical warfare, but active, real-time military operations conducted for the express purpose of showing us what humanity was capable of when pressed into conflict. Ambassador Creeth's environmental suit hissed as he adjusted his breathing mixture. Surely you don't mean they staged an actual battle? I mean exactly that, Zexai replied, his scales shifting to a darker hue. They had divided their demonstration force into two factions, each equipped with different technological approaches and tactical doctrines. The scenario was simple. One faction would attempt to establish a mining operation on the largest asteroid, while the other faction would prevent them from doing so. Both sides would use live weapons and real military equipment. The hologram zoomed in on the largest asteroid, revealing a chunk of rock roughly 50 kilometers in diameter. As the assembled delegates watched, small objects began to appear around it, too distant to resolve clearly, but moving with obvious purpose. The defending force consisted of 24 human vessels, each approximately the size of our standard patrol craft. Zexai explained. They had established defensive positions around the asteroid and were preparing to resist any attempt at landing. The attacking force comprised 18 vessels of similar size, plus 3 larger ships that the humans designated as command platforms. Archon Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with a sharp blue light, indicating distress. You observed an actual military engagement between human factions? We observed something far worse than that, Zexai said quietly. We observed humanity's approach to what they called total war. The holographic display suddenly erupted with activity as the human demonstration began. Bright flashes of energy weapons lit up space around the asteroid, while sleek spacecraft maneuvered in complex patterns that seemed to defy conventional tactical doctrine. The initial engagement lasted 14 minutes. Zexai narrated as the hologram replayed the events. During that time, both human factions demonstrated technological capabilities that exceeded our initial assessments of their civilization's development level. Their weapon systems were crude by galactic standards, but effective. Their spacecraft were primitive, but fast and maneuverable. Their tactics were... He paused, searching for words that could adequately convey what he had witnessed. Suicidal, he finally said. Their tactics were completely suicidal. Individual human pilots deliberately sacrificed their vessels to create tactical advantages for their comrades. Ships with damaged systems rammed enemy positions rather than withdrawing. When conventional weapons proved insufficient, they resorted to using their own spacecraft as projectiles. The hologram showed one of the attacking vessels, its hull trailing atmosphere and debris, accelerating directly toward a defensive position. The impact created a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the distant sun. By galactic military doctrine, this should have been a catastrophic loss of trained personnel and valuable equipment, Zexai explained. But the humans had planned for such sacrifices. Each vessel was equipped with escape pods, and the pilots who died in the simulation were immediately retrieved by support craft. They treated the loss of ships not as failures, but as tactical tools. Dr. Yilmagna's mandibles clicked rapidly. This is inefficient beyond measure. The cost in resources alone should make such tactics impossible. That's what we thought, Zexai agreed. But we had misunderstood something fundamental about human resource management. The ships they were sacrificing had been designed to be expendable. Built quickly, using standardized components, meant to serve in a single engagement and then be discarded. The hologram shifted to show one of the human vessels in cross-section. Its internal structure was startlingly simple, composed of modular components that could be rapidly assembled or replaced. They had industrialized warfare, HFY continued. Not just the production of weapons, but the entire concept of military operations. Their fleet wasn't composed of carefully crafted vessels representing years of development and resource investment. It was the product of assembly line manufacturing, designed to produce large numbers of functional warships in minimal time. Ambassador Creeth's tentacles writhed with confusion. But the pilots? Surely they couldn't replace trained personnel as easily as ships? That assumption proved equally wrong, HFY said grimly. The humans had developed what they called accelerated training protocols. Using advanced simulation technology and intensive education programs, they could transform a civilian into a competent military pilot in less than one of their years. The implications of this struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. In galactic civilization, military training was a lengthy process requiring years of education and experience. The idea of mass-producing combat personnel was as alien as anything they had encountered. But surely this rapid training must result in inferior capabilities, pressed Dr. Yilmardner. Under normal circumstances, yes, HFY replied. But humans had designed their tactics to compensate for individual limitations through coordinated group actions. Watch. The hologram replayed a sequence showing human fighters operating in tight formations, each vessel covering the weaknesses of its companions while maximizing collective strengths. They called it swarm tactics, HFY explained. Individual human pilots might lack the experience and skill of seasoned galactic warriors, but they operated as components of a larger tactical organism. Each pilot specialized in specific functions: attack, defense, reconnaissance, support, and the group functioned as a single entity with capabilities exceeding the sum of its parts. And when the demonstration concluded? Asked Archon Veltar. That's when the real horror began, HFY said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The attacking force succeeded in establishing their mining operation. But rather than declaring victory and ending the exercise, both human factions regrouped and prepared for Phase 2. The hologram showed the aftermath of the initial battle. Debris fields marked the locations where vessels had been destroyed, but already new ships were arriving to replace the losses. Both sides were visibly reinforcing their positions. Phase 2 was what they called escalation. HFY continued. Having demonstrated conventional tactics, the humans proceeded to show us what happened when conventional methods proved insufficient. New vessels appeared in the holographic display, larger and more heavily armed than the previous ships. But these craft moved differently, with less agility but far more deliberate purpose. They brought in what they termed siege platforms, HFY explained. Mobile weapons systems designed specifically for reducing fortified positions. These weren't ships in the conventional sense. They were barely more than engines strapped to massive weapons arrays. The defensive human faction responded by deploying something equally disturbing. Asteroids themselves converted into weapons platforms. The rocky bodies sprouted weapon emplacements and defensive systems, transforming the battlefield into a three-dimensional maze of fortified positions. This phase of the demonstration lasted 6 hours, HFY said. During that time, both human factions systematically destroyed everything in the immediate area. Not just enemy forces, but the asteroids themselves, nearby debris, anything that could provide cover or resources to their opponents. Dr. Yilmardner's voice carried a note of horror as she asked, "They destroyed the very resources they were fighting to control?" Without hesitation, HFY confirmed. When asked about this afterward, the human commander explained that denying resources to an enemy was often more valuable than securing those resources for oneself. They called it scorched earth doctrine. If you cannot hold something, destroy it so your enemy cannot benefit from it either. The holographic display showed the aftermath of Phase 2. Where once a rich asteroid field had offered mining opportunities, now only fragments remained, too small and scattered to be economically valuable. But surely this was the conclusion of their demonstration? Ambassador Creeth asked hopefully. Phase 3, HFY said simply, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The hologram shifted to show new activity. Ships were arriving from deeper in the Sol system, but these vessels were different from anything that had appeared before. They were massive, kilometers long, and their hulls bore strange protrusions that pulsed with ominous energy. The humans called these planet killers, HFY said, his scales now completely black with distress. Mobile platforms designed for what they termed strategic resource denial on a stellar scale. Their purpose was to demonstrate humanity's willingness to destroy entire worlds rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. The chamber fell absolutely silent except for the mechanical sounds of life support systems. The concept being described was so far beyond conventional military doctrine that it challenged the basic assumptions of galactic civilization. They wouldn't actually, Doctor, Yulmagna began. They would, Zexay interrupted. And they did. Not to an inhabited world, of course, but to a marginal planet in the outer system that contained potential mining resources. We watched as human planet killer platforms systematically broke apart a world that could have supported mining operations for centuries. The hologram showed the destruction in horrifying detail. Massive energy beams carved through planetary crust while gravity manipulation devices tore apart the planet's structural integrity. Within hours, what had been a small world became an expanding cloud of debris.
The human commander explained that this demonstrated their species' commitment to victory at any cost. Zexay continued.
They would rather render an entire star system uninhabitable than allow an enemy to benefit from its resources. Archon Veltar's crystalline form had shifted to a deep red color, indicating extreme agitation.
This level of destructive capability in the hands of a pre-contact species violates every assumption underlying galactic integration protocols. The demonstration concluded with what the humans called total sterilization, Zexay said. Using weapons that released self-replicating molecular destructors, they eliminated every trace of organic matter from the demonstration area. Not just to remove evidence of the exercise, they explained, but to show us their capability for biological warfare on a cosmic scale. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the assembled delegates in darkness broken only by the emergency lighting systems. When Captain Morsha asked Dr. Chen why humanity had chosen to reveal such terrifying capabilities during first contact, her response changed everything we thought we knew about diplomatic relations. Zexay said into the darkness. Which was? Whispered Dr. Yulmagna. She said, because we want you to understand that we're not asking to join galactic civilization as junior partners. We're informing you that we exist. We're expanding beyond our home system, and we're willing to coexist peacefully with our neighbors. But if coexistence proves impossible, we want you to understand exactly what that means. The lights gradually returned to normal intensity, revealing the faces of delegates struggling to process what they had heard. The humans weren't demonstrating their military capabilities, Zexay concluded. They were delivering an ultimatum disguised as a diplomatic presentation. They were telling us that they would accept friendship, but they were prepared for war on a scale that would make galactic civilization itself a casualty. And how did Captain Morsha respond to this ultimatum? Asked Ambassador Kreeth. He made the decision that would doom his career and change the course of galactic history, Zexay replied. He recommended immediate integration of humanity into galactic civilization with full membership status and minimal supervision. Impossible, breathed Archon Veltar. No first contact species receives immediate full membership. Captain Morsha's reasoning was simple, Zexay explained. Humanity was going to expand into galactic space whether we welcome them or not. The choice wasn't whether to integrate them, but whether they would be integrated as friends or as conquerors. The weight of this revelation settled over the chamber like a physical presence. Every delegate understood the implications, though none wanted to acknowledge them. The Galactic Council rejected Captain Morsha's recommendation, Zexay continued. They classified humanity as a controlled integration species and assigned a supervision fleet to monitor their development. Standard protocol for managing dangerous pre-contact civilizations. A reasonable precaution, observed Dr. Maya. Yulmagna. The most catastrophic mistake in galactic history, Zexay corrected. Because the Council had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. They thought they were managing the integration of another species into galactic civilization. He paused, his reptilian gaze moving across each delegate's face. They were actually trying to control a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history preparing for exactly this scenario. Humanity hadn't just developed the technology for interstellar warfare. They had developed the philosophy, the industrial capacity, and the social structures necessary to fight a war against the entire galaxy if necessary. And they were about to prove it. The Galactic Council's supervision fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system exactly 93 days after first contact protocols concluded. Commander Zexay, demoted from his position aboard the exploration vessel following Captain Morsha's controversial recommendation, found himself assigned as a tactical advisor to the supervision mission, a role that would give him a front-row seat to humanity's first demonstration of interstellar warfare. Admiral Koreth commanded the supervision fleet. Zexay told the assembled tribunal, his claws scraping unconsciously against the metal table. 200 vessels strong, representing the combined military forces of 8 galactic civilizations. By any measure of conventional military power, it was sufficient to subdue or destroy any single planetary civilization. The holographic display materialized, showing the impressive array of ships that had assembled at the heliopause of humanity's home system. Sleek Thrakari battlecruisers flanked massive Voldorian siege platforms, while swarms of smaller vessels from various species filled the spaces between the capital ships. The mission parameters were straightforward. Zexhay continued. Establish a blockade preventing human expansion beyond their home system. Monitor their technological development. Intervene if they attempted to construct weapons systems capable of threatening galactic security. Standard containment protocol for dangerous emerging civilizations. Dr. Yilmagna's mandibles clicked with approval. Sensible precautions, given what you had observed during their demonstration. Sensible if we had been dealing with a conventional species. Zexai agreed grimly. But humanity had used the 93 days between first contact and the fleet's arrival to prepare for exactly this scenario. The hologram shifted, zooming in on the inner solar system. What it revealed sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. The space around Earth had been transformed into something that resembled a three-dimensional maze of defensive installations. In less than 3 standard months, humanity had constructed the most extensive orbital defense network any of us had ever seen. Zexai explained. Thousands of automated weapons platforms, interconnected shield generators, mobile defense stations that could relocate their positions within hours. They had turned their entire star system into a fortress. Ambassador Creeth's tentacles writhed nervously. Impossible. No species can construct such extensive installations in so short a time. We made that assumption as well, Zexai replied. Admiral Kareth's initial assessment was that the humans were displaying empty shells designed to look intimidating, but lacking actual defensive capabilities. The decision was made to proceed with standard containment protocols. The holographic display showed the supervision fleet taking up positions around the outer system, maintaining careful distances from the human defensive installations while establishing communication relays and monitoring stations. The first indication that we had gravely underestimated humanity came 12 hours after the fleet achieved standard blockade formation. Zexay continued. The humans initiated what they called diplomatic contact under siege conditions. A new image appeared in the hologram. A single human vessel approaching the supervision fleet. It was small, unarmed, and broadcasting continuous identification signals to ensure there could be no mistake about its peaceful intentions. Doctor. Sarah Chen commanded this diplomatic vessel personally, Zexay said. Her message to Admiral Korath was brief and direct. Humanity wished to discuss the terms under which the blockade would be lifted. Archon Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with confusion. Terms. A contained species does not negotiate the terms of their containment. Dr. Chen's response to that exact statement became legendary among human diplomatic corps, Zexay said. She informed Admiral Korath that humanity rejected the concept of containment entirely, and that the supervision fleet had exactly 72 hours to begin withdrawal from the Sol system. The chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement registered. A pre-contact species had just delivered an ultimatum to a fleet representing the combined military might of galactic civilization. Admiral Korath's response was predictably dismissive. Zexhay continued. He explained that the supervision fleet operated under the authority of the Galactic Council, that humanity's opinions regarding the blockade were irrelevant, and that any attempt to interfere with fleet operations would be considered an act of war.
And Dr.
Chen's reply? Asked Dr. Yilmagna. She thanked the Admiral for clarifying the situation. Zexay said quietly. Then she informed him that humanity accepted his declaration of war, and that hostilities would commence at the conclusion of the 72-hour withdrawal period. The holographic display showed the human diplomatic vessel turning away from the supervision fleet and beginning its journey back toward the inner system. Its departure marked the beginning of what would become known as the 72-hour war. The next 3 days revealed the true scope of human preparation for interstellar conflict, Zexhay said. While we had been observing their orbital defenses and counting their visible installations, humanity had been implementing what they called distributed defense doctrine. The hologram began to reveal the extent of human preparations. What had appeared to be empty space around the outer planets suddenly came alive with activity, as previously invisible installations activated their systems. Weapons platforms that had been powered down to avoid detection suddenly blazed with energy signatures. Mobile defense units that had been hiding among asteroid fields emerged to take up combat positions. They had hidden their true capabilities, Zexhay explained. Every observation we had made, every intelligence assessment we had conducted, had been based on information they had deliberately allowed us to gather. The orbital defense network we could see represented perhaps 10% of their actual defensive capacity. Ambassador Kreith's environmental suit hissed as he struggled to process this information. Deception during first contact protocols violates every standard of civilized interaction. Humanity had never agreed to follow galactic standards, Zexai pointed out. They had made it clear from the beginning that they considered themselves equals in any negotiation. We chose to interpret this as primitive arrogance rather than strategic positioning. The holographic display showed the supervision fleet's growing awareness of the true scope of human defenses. Reconnaissance vessels that had been monitoring the outer system began reporting contact with previously undetected installations. Deep space sensors revealed weapons platforms hidden among the orbital debris of the outer planets. Admiral Korath found himself facing a choice. Zexai continued. He could withdraw the fleet and report to the Galactic Council that humanity's defenses were more extensive than originally assessed, or he could proceed with containment operations and risk an engagement with an enemy of unknown capabilities. He chose to fight, Dr. Yilmagna stated. He chose to teach humanity a lesson about the consequences of defying galactic authority, Zexai corrected. The attack began at precisely the moment Dr. Chen's 72-hour deadline expired. The hologram erupted with activity as the battle began. The supervision fleet, arranged in the classic galactic formation optimized for overwhelming localized resistance, moved toward the inner system, their weapons systems powered up in sequence, preparing to systematically destroy the human defensive installations. The first human response was unlike anything we had expected, Zexai said as the holographic battle unfolded. Rather than attempting to defend their fixed installations, they abandoned them. The display showed human defensive platforms suddenly going dark, their crews evacuating in small, fast vessels that scattered in all directions. Within minutes, the elaborate orbital defense network that had impressed the supervision fleet was empty of personnel. Admiral Korath interpreted this as surrender, Zexai explained. The fleet advanced to occupy the abandoned installations, preparing to establish permanent monitoring stations within the human system. But it wasn't surrender, observed Archon Veltar. It was the opening move in a style of warfare that none of us understood. Zexai confirmed. The moment the supervision fleet committed to occupying the abandoned defensive positions, humanity revealed the true nature of their strategy. The holographic display showed the abandoned human installation suddenly exploding in brilliant flashes of light and energy. But these were not random destructions. They were precisely timed detonations that caught the advancing galactic ships in carefully planned kill zones. They had booby-trapped their own defenses, Zexai said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration. Not just with conventional explosives, but with weapon systems designed to activate only when enemy forces came within range. The supervision fleet found itself under attack by installations they thought they had captured. Battle raged for 6 hours, with the supervision fleet slowly advancing through the human system, while under constant attack from weapons that seemed to materialize from empty space. Every asteroid, every piece of orbital debris, every seemingly innocent piece of space junk revealed itself to be a potential threat. By the time Admiral Korath reached the inner system, he had lost 37 vessels to what the humans called defensive mining. Zexai continued. The fleet's combat effectiveness had been reduced by nearly 20% without ever engaging the main human forces. Where were the main human forces? Asked Dr. Fortune. Yilmagna. That question would haunt Admiral Korath for the remainder of his career, Zexai replied. Because the answer was everywhere and nowhere. The holographic display shifted to show the inner solar system, where the supervision fleet expected to find Earth's primary defenses. Instead, they found something that defied all conventional military doctrine. The humans had evacuated Earth, Zexai said simply. The entire population of their homeworld, billions of individuals, had been relocated to mobile habitats hidden throughout their system. Their military forces operated from ships that were indistinguishable from civilian transports. Their command centers were located on vessels that could change position faster than our sensors could track them. The implications struck the assembled delegates like physical blows. A species had abandoned its homeworld rather than defend it in place, transforming an entire civilization into a mobile fleet capable of operating anywhere within their stellar territory. This violated every assumption underlying military planning, Zexai continued. Galactic warfare doctrine assumes that enemy forces will attempt to defend fixed assets, planets, space stations, resource installations. Humanity had made all their assets mobile. Ambassador Kreith's tentacles writhed with confusion. But surely they could not maintain an entire civilization in space indefinitely. They had been preparing for this scenario for generations, Zexhai explained. Humanity's response to the dying sun crisis had involved developing completely self-sufficient mobile habitats. By the time we arrived, they possessed the industrial capacity to maintain their civilization indefinitely without planetary support. The holographic display showed the supervision fleet's growing frustration as they attempted to locate and engage human forces that refused to fight conventional battles. Every time galactic forces concentrated on what appeared to be a major human installation, they found empty structures rigged with defensive systems. Every time they detected what seemed to be a human fleet concentration, they discovered decoy vessels broadcasting false sensor signatures. The supervision fleet spent 43 hours searching for an enemy that was simultaneously everywhere and impossible to find, Zexhai said. Admiral Korth's forces were being systematically worn down by hit-and-run attacks from vessels that appeared, struck, and vanished before effective countermeasures could be deployed. But surely the Galactic Fleet's superior firepower eventually told? Pressed Dr. Yilmagna. That assumption proved to be the Admiral's final mistake, Zexhai replied grimly. On the second day of the engagement, frustrated by his inability to force a decisive battle, Admiral Korth ordered the use of strategic weapons against Earth itself. The chamber's atmosphere seemed to crystallize as the delegates realized what was being described. Strategic weapons, planet killers designed to destroy entire worlds, were reserved for use against the most extreme threats to galactic security. The weapons were deployed from the supervision fleet's siege platforms, Zexhai continued. Massive projectiles designed to crack planetary crusts and render worlds uninhabitable. Admiral Korth's reasoning was that destroying the human homeworld would force them to surrender or face extinction. And humanity's response? Whispered Archon Veltar. They taught us the true meaning of total war, Zexhai said quietly. The moment our siege platforms began their bombardment sequence, every human ship in the system simultaneously revealed its true capabilities. The holographic display exploded with activity as thousands of human vessels suddenly appeared throughout the Sol system. Ships that had been disguised as debris, installations that had been powered down to appear defunct, weapons platforms that had been hidden in planetary atmospheres, all of them activated simultaneously. The humans had been holding back, Zexhai explained. Everything we had seen during their initial demonstration, all the defenses we had encountered during the advance through their system, had been their reserve forces. Their actual military capability was orders of magnitude larger than our intelligence had suggested. The supervision fleet found itself surrounded by an enemy force that outnumbered them by more than 10 to 1. But numerical superiority was only the beginning of humanity's revelation. Their weapons technology had advanced significantly since first contact, Zexhai continued. 3 months of intensive development had produced systems that exceeded galactic standards in several categories. Their ships were faster, their weapons more accurate, their defensive systems more sophisticated than our assessments had indicated. But the most terrifying aspect of humanity's response was not technological, he added, his scales darkening to deep purple. It was tactical. They fought as if every battle was their species' final stand, with a coordination and determination that transcended individual survival instincts. The holographic display showed human ships deliberately sacrificing themselves to create tactical advantages for their compatriots. Vessels with damaged systems used their remaining power to ram galactic ships. Pilots whose craft were disabled continued fighting with personal weapons and improvised explosives. Mobile habitats that contained civilian populations jettisoned their life support systems to power additional weapons. They were willing to accept the extinction of their species rather than submit to containment, Zexhai said. Every human in their system, military and civilian alike, had committed themselves to total resistance regardless of the cost. The battle's conclusion came not through military defeat, but through Admiral Korth's realization that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, an entire civilization choosing mutual extinction over subjugation. The Admiral's final report to the Galactic Council contained a single recommendation, Zexhai said. Immediate withdrawal from the Sol system and full diplomatic recognition of humanity as an independent galactic power. The Council accepted this recommendation? Asked Dr. Kubala. Yilmagna. The Council had little choice, Zexhai replied. Admiral Korth had made it clear that the alternative was a war that would require the combined fleets of all galactic civilizations, with no guarantee of victory and the certainty of casualties that would cripple galactic society for generations. But surely this was the end of the crisis, hoped Ambassador Kreeth. It was only the beginning, Zexhai corrected, because humanity had learned something important during the 72-hour war. They had learned that galactic civilization was not invincible. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the assembled delegates in contemplative silence. And they began to plan accordingly. The period following the 72-hour war became known in galactic historical records as the Great Expansion, though Commander Zexai would later argue that the human invasion would have been a more accurate term. Within 6 standard months of Admiral Korith's withdrawal from the Sol system, humanity had established permanent colonies in 17 different star systems. They moved like nothing we had ever encountered before, Zexai told the tribunal, his reptilian features etched with the memory of those chaotic months. Traditional galactic colonization follows established patterns: survey, assessment, infrastructure development, gradual population transfer. The process typically takes decades for each new system. Humanity accomplished it in weeks. The holographic display materialized above the table, showing a 3-dimensional map of local galactic space. Bright red indicators marked the location of new human settlements, spreading outward from Sol in an expanding sphere of controlled territory. Their methodology defied every principle of sustainable expansion, Zexai continued. Rather than establishing a few well-developed colonies, they created hundreds of minimal outposts throughout accessible systems. Each outpost contained just enough infrastructure to support basic industrial operations and serve as a staging point for further expansion. Dr. Yilmardner studied the holographic map with growing alarm. This expansion pattern violates the Galactic Settlement Accords. New civilizations are restricted to a maximum of 3 colony systems during their first century of interstellar activity. Humanity never signed the Galactic Settlement Accords, Zexai pointed out. When questioned about their adherence to galactic law, Dr. Chen's response was characteristically direct. We will respect the territorial claims of established civilizations, but we do not recognize restrictions on our expansion into unclaimed space. Ambassador Kreeth's tentacles writhed with agitation. Unclaimed space exists for good reasons. Many systems are unsuitable for colonization, too dangerous to develop, or reserved for future use by established civilizations. Human definitions of suitable for colonization proved to be significantly more flexible than galactic standards, Zexai replied grimly. They established outposts in systems with unstable stars, on worlds with toxic atmospheres, in regions of space affected by dangerous radiation phenomena. Anywhere that could potentially support human life, they planted a colony. The holographic map zoomed in on one of the human settlements, revealing a collection of prefabricated structures clustered around a massive industrial complex on the surface of a world that glowed with an ominous red light. This is Colony Designation Prometheus 7, Zexai explained. Established on a world orbiting a variable star that emits lethal radiation pulses every few days. By galactic standards, it's completely uninhabitable. The humans built underground cities and emerged only during the brief safe periods to conduct mining operations. Madness, whispered Dr. Yilmardner. No rational species would expose their population to such conditions. The humans manning Prometheus 7 were volunteers, Zexai said, individuals who had specifically requested assignment to what their government classified as extreme hazard colonies. They viewed the dangerous conditions not as obstacles, but as challenges to overcome. Archon Veltar's crystalline form pulsed with deep blue light. You speak of their government. How did humanity maintain administrative control over such rapidly expanding territories? That question troubled galactic observers from the beginning. Zexai admitted. Conventional wisdom suggested that any civilization expanding so rapidly would experience governmental breakdown within the first few years. Human society should have fragmented into independent colony systems, each developing its own culture and eventually losing contact with the homeworld. The holographic display shifted to show communication networks, linking the expanding human territories. Streams of data flowed between systems in complex patterns that seemed to defy the normal limitations of interstellar communication. Humanity had solved the administrative problem before beginning their expansion, Zexai continued. They had developed what they called distributed governance protocols. Rather than attempting to control their colonies from a central authority, they created a system where each settlement maintained semi-autonomous status while remaining connected to the larger human civilization. Explain this concept, requested Dr. Yilmardner. Each human colony was established with complete industrial self-sufficiency from day one, Zexai said. They could manufacture everything needed to maintain and expand their operations without requiring support from other human territories. This eliminated the dependency relationships that typically bind colonial systems to their parent civilizations. The holographic display showed the internal structure of a typical human colony. Industrial complexes, residential areas, and government facilities were all designed according to standardized templates that could be rapidly constructed using local materials. But autonomy alone does not explain administrative cohesion, pointed out Ambassador Cree_3rd. True, Zexay agreed. The key to human colonial administration was their communication technology. They had developed quantum entanglement networks that provided instantaneous communication across interstellar distances. Every human colony maintained real-time contact with their central government and with each other. The implications of this technology struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Instantaneous interstellar communication was a theoretical possibility that galactic science had been pursuing for centuries without success. How did they achieve quantum entanglement on such a scale? Demanded Dr. Yilmagna. Through the same methodology they applied to every technological challenge, Zexy replied. Massive resource expenditure, accelerated development programs, and willingness to accept casualties during the testing process. The holographic display shifted to show human research installations, vast complexes dedicated to pushing the boundaries of theoretical physics through experimental programs that would have been considered unacceptably dangerous by galactic standards. They lost 3 research stations and approximately 12,000 personnel developing stable quantum entanglement technology. Zexhai continued. Each failure provided data that informed the next attempt. Their willingness to sacrifice lives for technological advancement allowed them to achieve breakthroughs in months that might have taken galactic science decades to accomplish safely. Barbaric, murmured Archon Veltar. Effective, Zexay corrected. By the end of their first year of expansion, humanity possessed communication capabilities that exceeded those of any galactic civilization. They could coordinate activities across dozens of star systems as efficiently as if all their territories were located on a single world. The holographic map expanded to show the full scope of human expansion by the end of the first year. Red indicators mark settlements in over 50 systems, with supply lines and communication networks linking them into a coherent whole. But communication technology alone did not account for their expansion speed, Zexhay continued. The key factor was their approach to interstellar travel. New images appeared in the holographic display, showing human spacecraft unlike anything that had been observed during first contact. These vessels were enormous, kilometers in length, and appeared to be more mobile cities than traditional starships. They called them generation ships, Zexehai explained. Mobile colonies capable of supporting entire populations during extended interstellar journeys. But unlike traditional generation ships, these vessels were designed for rapid deployment and multiple use. Dr. Yilmagna studied the holographic images with growing alarm. The resource investment required to construct such vessels should have bankrupted their civilization. It would have bankrupted any conventional civilization, Zexhai agreed, but humanity had restructured their entire economy around what they called expansion warfare. Every aspect of their society was directed towards supporting the fastest possible rate of interstellar colonization. The holographic display showed the industrial complexes that humanity had constructed throughout their home system. Vast manufacturing installations that operated continuously, producing the materials and equipment needed to support ongoing expansion. They had automated their production systems to a degree that shocked galactic observers, Zexahay continued. Human workers were required primarily for design and maintenance functions. The actual manufacturing of goods was handled by artificial intelligence systems that could operate continuously without rest or error. Surely such automation must have resulted in massive unemployment, observed Ambassador Creeth. Humanity solved the unemployment problem by making expansion itself their primary economic activity. Zexay explained. Every citizen who was not needed for production was automatically enrolled in colonization programs. Rather than supporting an unemployed population, the government trained them to establish and maintain new settlements. The scale of this social reorganization was staggering. An entire civilization had transformed itself into a colonization machine, with every aspect of society optimized for claiming new territory as rapidly as possible. But the most disturbing aspect of human expansion was not its speed or scale, Zexhai said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It was their strategic objectives. The holographic map shifted to highlight specific human settlements. Rather than random expansion, a clear pattern emerged. Human colonies were positioned to control key trade routes, strategic resource systems, and bottleneck points that could restrict the movement of galactic civilization. They weren't just colonizing for living space, Zexhai explained. They were claiming territory with military significance. Every human settlement was positioned to serve potential wartime objectives. You're suggesting they were preparing for war against galactic civilization? Asked Dr. Well. Yiel_Magna. I'm stating it directly, Zexhai replied. Human expansion followed classic military doctrine for controlling territory prior to major conflict. They were creating the infrastructure needed to support a war against the entire galaxy. The holographic display showed the defensive installations that surrounded each human colony. What appeared to be simple mining and manufacturing complexes were actually heavily fortified military bases capable of supporting extended siege operations.
Each human settlement could function as an independent fortress, Zexhai continued. Self-sufficient in terms of resources, heavily defended, and positioned to disrupt galactic trade and communication networks.
Within 18 months of their expansion beginning, humanity had created a strategic position that would make any military action against them prohibitively expensive. But surely the Galactic Council recognized this threat and took appropriate action, pressed Archon Veltar. The Council was paralyzed by political considerations, Zexhai said bitterly. Each member civilization was more concerned with how human expansion might affect their own territorial claims than with the collective threat to galactic stability. By the time they reached consensus on appropriate responses, humanity had achieved strategic parity. The holographic display showed the final position after 2 years of human expansion. Red indicators covered nearly a quarter of local galactic space, forming an interconnected network of fortified positions that could support each other in case of attack. Strategic parity, repeated Dr. Yiel_Magna. You mean they had achieved the capability to fight galactic civilization on equal terms? I mean they had achieved the capability to destroy galactic civilization, Zexhai corrected grimly. Their expansion had given them control over critical resource systems and trade routes. In the event of war, they could strangle the galactic economy while maintaining their own industrial capacity. But surely this was a bluff, protested Ambassador Kree _that. No civilization would actually risk mutual destruction over territorial disputes. That assumption, Zexhai said quietly, was about to be tested. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the chamber in contemplative silence. Because humanity was preparing to make their next move in what they had always seen as an inevitable conflict. He paused, his reptilian gaze moving across the assembled delegates. They were about to demonstrate what happened when a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history preparing for extinction warfare decided that defense was no longer sufficient. They were about to show us what human civilization looked like when it went on the offensive. The war that would reshape galactic civilization began not with grand declarations or massive fleet movements, but with a single human merchant vessel requesting permission to dock at Kepler Station, the largest trade hub in the Cygnus sector. Commander Zex, now serving as a military attaché to the Galactic Council's Strategic Assessment Division, was present when that request arrived. The vessel identified itself as the commercial transport New Horizon, Zexhai told the tribunal, his clawed fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the table's surface. Standard diplomatic protocols required that human ships be granted docking privileges at neutral stations. The station commander saw no reason to deny what appeared to be a routine trade mission. The holographic display materialized, showing Kepler Station in all its massive complexity. The artificial structure stretched for dozens of kilometers through space, its multiple rings and docking arms accommodating vessels from hundreds of different species. At its peak operation, the station facilitated trade worth trillions of galactic standard credits annually. The New Horizon docked at commercial berth 774 at $1,400 station time, Zexhai continued. Its manifest listed standard trade goods, rare earth elements, processed metals, technological components. Nothing that should have raised security concerns. 1. Dr. Yiel_Magna's compound eyes reflected the holographic light as she studied the image of the human vessel. It appears to be a typical merchant transport. Appearances, as we had learned repeatedly when dealing with humanity, were deliberately misleading, Zexhai replied. The New Horizon was indeed a merchant vessel, but it was also something else, a weapons platform designed to appear completely innocent until the moment of activation. The holographic display zoomed in on the human ship, revealing its true nature: hidden weapon systems, concealed sensor arrays, and reinforced hull sections that could protect military-grade equipment. 6 hours after docking, the vessel's crew initiated what they called Operation Prometheus, Zexhai said. The first phase involved the release of what appeared to be a simple atmospheric contaminant into the station's environmental systems. Chemical warfare, breathed Ambassador Kreith, his tentacles writhing with revulsion. Banned by every galactic accord. Not chemical warfare, Zexay corrected grimly. Something worse. The contaminant was a self-replicating nanomachine designed to infiltrate and disable electronic systems. Within 30 minutes, every piece of technology on Kepler Station had been compromised. The holographic station began to flicker and dim as the display showed the systematic failure of its systems. Life support, communication networks, defensive weapons, docking controls, everything that made the massive structure functional simply stopped working. The nanomachines didn't destroy the systems, Zexai explained. They took control of them. Every computer, every sensor, every automated system on the station now responded to commands from the human vessel. Impossible, protested Dr. Yilmagna. Galactic encryption protocols cannot be broken by primitive human technology. They weren't broken, Zexai said quietly. They were bypassed entirely. The nanomachines operated below the software level, directly manipulating hardware functions. No encryption in the galaxy could prevent them from seizing control of any electronic device they came into contact with. The implications struck the assembled delegates like physical blows. If humanity possessed the technology to seize control of any electronic system, then no galactic installation was safe from infiltration. Phase 2 of Operation Prometheus began immediately after the station's systems were compromised. Zexay continued. The human crew activated hidden weapon systems throughout the New Horizon and began systematically destroying any vessel that attempted to leave the station. The holographic display showed the chaos that erupted as ships of various species found themselves trapped in docking bays with their own systems under human control. Vessels that tried to break free were targeted by weapons that should not have existed on a civilian transport. But the weapons fire was the least of our concerns, Zexai said, his scales darkening with the memory. Because Phase 3 involved something that no galactic civilization had ever contemplated, the complete conversion of a civilian facility into a military asset. The holographic station began to transform before the delegates' eyes. Commercial docking bays reconfigured themselves into launch tubes for military craft. Trade processing centers became weapons manufacturing facilities. The massive fusion reactors that powered the station's operations were redirected to support military-grade shield generators and offensive systems. Within 12 hours, Kepler Station had been transformed into a fortress capable of controlling all traffic through the Cygnus sector, Zexai explained. But the truly terrifying aspect of the operation was not the speed of the conversion. It was the revelation that humanity had planned this transformation from the moment the station was constructed. That's impossible, Archon Veltar stated, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. Kepler Station was built by the Galactic Trade Consortium using standardized construction protocols. Humans had no involvement in its design. They had no official involvement. Zexai corrected. But they had been monitoring galactic construction projects since first contact, studying our engineering practices and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Every major installation built since humanity joined galactic civilization contained hidden weaknesses that they could activate when necessary. The scope of human infiltration began to dawn on the assembled delegates. For years, while the galaxy had been dealing with humanity as a new member of galactic civilization, they had been systematically preparing to convert galactic infrastructure to their own purposes. The seizure of Kepler Station was only the beginning. Zexai continued. Within hours, similar operations began throughout galactic space. Human merchant vessels that had been docked at stations across multiple sectors simultaneously revealed their true nature. The holographic display expanded to show a three-dimensional map of galactic space. Red indicators began appearing at major installations throughout known space, each representing a facility that had been taken over by human operatives. In a single coordinated strike, humanity seized control of 17 major space stations, 34 orbital installations, and over 200 smaller facilities, Zexai said. They had gained control of the galaxy's primary trade infrastructure without firing a single shot at a military target. The Galactic Council's response? Asked Dr. Yield_Magna. Panic, Zexai replied simply. Within hours of the coordinated seizures, emergency session was convened. The Council's military advisors recommended immediate deployment of all available fleets to retake the captured installations. A logical response, observed Ambassador Kreith. A catastrophic mistake, Zexai corrected, because humanity had anticipated exactly this reaction and prepared accordingly. The holographic display shifted to show galactic fleet movements converging on human-controlled installations.
Hundreds of warships from multiple species began moving toward their targets, confident in their ability to overwhelm what they assumed were lightly defended positions. The first fleet to engage human forces was Admiral Thexmar's 3rd Battle Group, Zexay continued. 57 vessels, including some of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, assigned to retake the captured orbital facility at Wolf 359. The hologram zoomed in on the approaching galactic fleet, showing their standard attack formation as they closed distance with the human-controlled installation. Admiral Thexmar expected to face improvised defenses manned by human civilians, Zexay said. What he encountered was something that redefined our understanding of military preparedness. The captured installation suddenly transformed, revealing weapon systems that exceeded anything in the galactic arsenal. Massive energy projectors emerged from what had appeared to be storage compartments, shield generators that could deflect planet-killer weapons activated around the station's perimeter. The humans hadn't just captured the installation, Zexay explained. They had spent months secretly upgrading its capabilities, using their control of galactic trade networks to smuggle military-grade equipment past security screenings. But where did they acquire such advanced weapons? Demanded Dr. Yiel_Magna. Human technology, while impressive, was still developing. They hadn't acquired the weapons, Zexay said grimly. They had built them. Using materials and components purchased through legitimate trade channels, assembled in facilities they had constructed throughout galactic space, and installed during routine maintenance operations that no one had thought to monitor. The battle for Wolf 359 lasted 14 minutes. When it ended, Admiral Thexmar's entire fleet had been either destroyed or captured with 0 human casualties. The engagement revealed the true scope of human military preparation. Zexay continued. They hadn't just been expanding into new territories for living space. They had been constructing the largest military-industrial complex in galactic history. The holographic display showed the extent of human manufacturing capabilities. Hidden installations throughout their controlled territories, each producing weapons and equipment that exceeded galactic technological standards. But the most devastating revelation came when the Council attempted to deploy strategic weapons against human positions. Zexay said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Planet killers," breathed Archon Veltar. The Council authorized the use of world-ending weapons against 3 human-controlled systems, HFY confirmed. The reasoning was that humanity's military capabilities required the ultimate response to prevent their complete conquest of galactic space. The holographic display showed massive galactic siege platforms taking aim at human territories. These weapons, designed to crack planets and sterilize entire systems, represented the ultimate expression of galactic military power. The weapons were fired simultaneously at human colonies in the Tau Ceti, Proxima Centauri, and Gliese 667, Zexay continued. Each weapon carried sufficient destructive power to eliminate any possible resistance. And the result? Asked Dr. Bird. Yiel_Magna, though her voice suggested she already feared the answer. The weapons were intercepted, Zexay said simply. Not deflected, not absorbed, but physically intercepted by human vessels that deliberately placed themselves in the path of planet-killing energies. The silence that followed was absolute. The concept of deliberately sacrificing ships and crews to protect planetary targets violated every principle of military logic. Each weapon was stopped by a single human vessel, Zexay continued. Ships that had been specifically designed and constructed for the sole purpose of absorbing planet-killer impacts. Their crews were volunteers who had trained their entire lives for missions they knew would end in their deaths. Madness, whispered Ambassador Kreeth. Effectiveness, Zexay corrected. Because the interception of the Council's ultimate weapons sent a message that resonated throughout galactic civilization. There was no level of destruction that humanity would not sacrifice themselves to prevent. And the Council's final decision? Asked Archon Veltar. Unconditional surrender, Zexay said quietly. Faced with an enemy that would sacrifice anything to achieve victory, the Council chose to negotiate rather than face the complete destruction of galactic civilization. The holographic display faded to black, leaving the chamber in contemplative silence. The negotiations lasted 6 months. Zexay continued. In the end, humanity achieved everything they had sought since first contact. Recognition as equals in galactic civilization, unrestricted access to galactic territory, and the right to expand their influence without external limitation. And now? Asked Dr. Yiel_Magna. Now they control nearly 30% of galactic space. Zexay replied. Their military capabilities exceed those of any other civilization. Their industrial capacity dwarfs the combined output of all other species. They have become the dominant power in the galaxy through sheer determination to accept any sacrifice necessary for survival. He paused, his reptilian gaze moving across each delegate's face. But perhaps most importantly, they have taught us something about ourselves. We believed that civilization meant the gradual evolution beyond the primitive drives that once threatened to destroy us. Humanity showed us that those drives, properly channeled, might be the only thing that ensures survival when existence itself is threatened. The question that brought us here today, Zexay concluded, is whether the galaxy is safer or more dangerous now that we share it with a species that views extinction as preferable to submission. He gestured to the darkened holographic display. I have told you what I witnessed on human battlefields. I have shown you the chilling tales of their capabilities. The decision about what to do with this knowledge is yours to make. But I will say this. If humanity ever decides that coexistence with galactic civilization is no longer possible, then the war we have just avoided will seem like a minor disagreement compared to what they are capable of bringing to bear. The chamber fell silent as Commander Zexai's testimony concluded, leaving the assembled delegates to contemplate a galaxy forever changed by the presence of beings who refuse to accept defeat regardless of the cost.